Hey, what's going on, everybody? Let's mess everything up and see how to fix it. Hey, what's going on, everyone? Have you ever wanted to learn how to fix an error message? Me too!
I made mistakes!
Alright, let's jump right in with error messages. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my Java folder, and we're going to open this with Visual Studio Code. Let's go ahead and make a new file. I'm going to call this error.java. And then let's make our class. So this class is going to be also called error. And if you've ever made a main method with me before, go ahead and say it along with me. Public static void main string array args. And let's go ahead and get into it. Even I didn't get through that perfectly, but that's okay. We all make errors. And that's one of the first things that you want to understand when it comes to programming is your code is never going to be perfect. Except for mine. Mine is always perfect.
Yeah, whatever. So
let's start with a basic error, and then we're going to build up from there. So let's say that I wanted to declare a string. So I'm going to say string name, but instead of actually saying equals something like equals Jane or equals Tom or something, we're going to just say string name. This is something that's valid. We don't have to initialize the variable. And this is okay. This is still valid code. But what is not valid is if I tried now to print this string. So if I said system.out.println and I tried to print this name string that I declared, let's go ahead now and open up our terminal. We're going to go to our desktop and our Java folder. Let's go ahead and compile with Java C error.java. And now you can see that I got my first error. So this error right here is going to give me some information. So I kind of want to point some of that out to you now. The first thing is it starts off with the file name, colon, and then the line number of the error. One of the really nice things about most programming languages is they're going to give you an error message and try to tell you exactly where you failed. And in this instance, Java is going to go ahead and tell me that I failed right inside of my print statement right here where I tried to print name. And then the error message itself says variable name might not have been initialized. So one way that I can fix this is very simple. I can just simply say equals, let's say Henry. Let's save this and compile. And then run. We're going to do Java error. And now you can see I got Henry. So that's nothing super exciting. So let's now step this up a little bit more. Let's go ahead now and mess with an array. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say int birthday array. So let's go ahead and not initialize this one as well. And also I forgot to put my brackets. So let's go ahead and put my brackets there. So now that I have my birthday array, let's go ahead and save and compile. So I'm going to go to Java C error.java and I get another error. It says line 6, but this time the message is different from before. It says cannot find symbol name. So that's one of the reasons why it's always really important to actually read your error statements.
I was elected to lead, not to read.
And I'm very guilty of this myself. Sometimes I'll gloss over this message and think an error message is exactly the same. One of the most important tips that I can actually give to you, read your error messages. It will take you really far. This says cannot find symbol, and then it tells me the symbol, which is right here. It says variable name, and in the class error. So here's my class error. Here's the variable name, but it's saying name doesn't exist, and that's because we changed it to a birthday array. Okay, so that was just a simple little error that we could definitely run into. So if you ever see that, that's a good sign that maybe you need to go back and look at your variables that you created. So in this instance here now, let's go ahead and define an array here. So we're gonna say something like 1, 2, 3, 4. And now what we want to do is we want to print out the array itself. So let's go ahead now and put birthday array. So if I put birthday array just like this and save it, let's compile and run this. Let's go ahead now and do our compile, Java C error.java, and let's run with Java error. Oh no, I didn't get an error message, but I didn't get what I expected. I didn't see 1, 2, 3, 4 at all. I actually got this really weird gibberish. What is this? This right here is actually the memory address of where this array is stored. Now you might be asking yourself, why am I seeing a memory address? And the main reason for that is because I actually tried to print the entire array without accessing the individual parts of the array. So by telling it, hey, print the birthday array, it's not going to be able to do it because this print statement is not equipped to handle that. In this instance, it's just going to print out the memory address of where the array is located. Now, if I want to fix this problem, you probably already know, all I have to do is put some brackets at the end of this and a number. So like, let's say the number 1 here, and save this. And now let's try to do the same thing. We're going to compile and run. And now we got the number 2. And the reason why we got the number 2 is because remember, when we do an array, the indices start at 0. So when I say 1, I'm going to get the second item in that array. Let's key in on that fact that the array starts at 0 and see how we could actually create a problem with that. Let's go ahead and do a for loop. So let's go ahead and say for int I equals 0, I is less than 2, and then let's say I plus plus. And now let's do a system.out.print. So we're going to say system.out.println, and then we're going to do our birthday array. So we'll say birthday array, and then we're going to say I, and then let's go ahead and save it. So now let's see if we get an error here. Let's go ahead now and run this and see what we get. So we're going to go ahead now and compile, and we're going to run it. Now we didn't get an error, but here's the important part to pay attention to. We didn't get what we expected either. So this isn't an error exactly, but it is not intended behavior.
No way.
So I wanted to print out 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I only got to 2. Another tip is whenever you're setting things up like an array, make sure that you're very careful to look at your escape clause inside of your array. So my escape clause here says, whenever I is equal to 2, basically, that's when this for loop is going to end. Well, let's now do the opposite end of the spectrum. Let's actually jump this to say 12 or something along those lines. Well, this array clearly is going to be in disarray, but
Make it stop 5.
This 12 is going to be much larger than what we have because this is only 4 numbers, right? So let's go ahead now, save this, and let's go ahead now and compile and run, and we get our 4. We get 1, 2, 3, 4, but then we get an error. It says exception in thread main. This main thread that it's talking about is my main method right here that you can see. And it says that there was a Java Lang array index out of bounds exception. And then it follows up with index 4 is out of bounds for length 4. The reason why 4 is out of bounds, because again, let's count from 0 from our first number. 0, 1, 2, and 3. That means the fourth number's index is 3. So the first number where we go out of bounds is 4. Hopefully that makes sense. Listen to that part back if you need to. Let's try to mix this up a little bit now. So now that we know that our array is of size 4, but the ending index is 3, let's try to do a countdown now. So let's say that we start at 3, and then instead of saying I is less than 12, let's say I is greater than -2. And then I minus minus. So in this case, we're actually doing a countdown from 3 to -1, and I'm pretty sure you see where I'm going with this now. Let's save this and run it and see what happens. So we're gonna go to compile. It compiles fine, but as soon as we go to run it, we get another index out of bounds exception, and it's because we hit -1, because the first index is 0. So this shows you that for this particular array, my initial index is 0, my ending index is 3, and going out of bounds on either side is going to result in this exception that I get right here. And this type of error, whenever you see an index out of bounds error, that's a very good sign that you're dealing with a data structure like an array where it contains multiple things. So now let's step it up even further. Let's do a method instead. So remember earlier how I actually had a method in my methods video called bark? Let's go ahead and make the bark method here. So I'm going to say bark, and then let's put our open and close brackets. Let's do our open and close braces, and let's just do a system.out.println, and we're just going to simply say bark. Nothing too out of the ordinary yet, right? Okay, so let's erase our array and our for loop here. And all we want to do now is just make sure that we can bark. So we're going to say bark, because we just simply want to bark, right? So I'm going to save this now, and let's run this and let's see it bark. Let's go ahead and compile. And we have an error. It says invalid method declaration, a return type is required. So if you watch the methods video, you would know that as soon as I type this bark without a return type, it's not going to work. Okay, well, since it wants a return type, well, let's just put string, because that's what we're printing, right? So let's save this and run it. So we're going to compile. Oh, I got another error. It says non-static method bark cannot be referenced from static content. Again, if you watch the methods video, you know the only way I can call this bark method is if I made it static, and then I would be able to call it like this. So if I said static, that should fix the problem, right? So let's save it now, and let's compile and run. Oh no, I got another error. It says missing a return statement. Well, what in the hello world is going on here? Well, I can see that it says Java line 4, because remember, that's what's after the colon here. So if I go to my line 4, it's saying that there's no return statement at this final curly bracket, because a method is expecting a return statement anywhere between these curly brackets, which is why it says line 4. Now, since I know that it needs a return statement, well, is there any type of return statement that allows me to return nothing? Well, yeah, the void type. So let's change this from string bark to void. And let's save and run. Sure enough, it compiles. And if we run it, we get our bark. So we were able to fix it, but did you notice how many different types of errors we had along the way? And we're not even done yet. There's definitely more errors to be had here. So let's take a look now. Like if we didn't want to do static, so let's say we took static off. The way that we would be able to use bark is by making an error object. Remember that? So let's go ahead and make our error object. So we're going to say error ERR equals new error. And let's go ahead and do our open and close curly brackets. And now that we have our error, let's go ahead now and make it say err.bark. Save that, and let's compile and run. And does this work? It compiles. And now let's do Java error, and we get bark. So it worked as expected here too. But how can we break this? In our last video on classes, we talked about constructors, and constructors are a perfect way to break this. So what we could do now is inside of our class here, let's make an error constructor. So we're going to say public error with a capital E, because that's what we're setting up for our constructor. And then we're going to go ahead and do open and close brackets here. And then let's say that we're going to make our constructor pass in a variable. We'll just say int I to make it really simple. So int I here is not actually doing anything, but by defining an error constructor, we no longer have the use of an empty constructor here. So if I save this and let's try to compile and run, let's see what happens. I actually get another error, ironically enough, and it's going to tell me error, constructor error in class error. That's a mouthful. Cannot be applied to the given types. And then it basically is pointing out here where I say new error, but notice there's nothing in here in this constructor that takes anything. But the constructor that we made is taking an integer. So basically it's saying, hey, you need to give me an integer, but you're giving me nothing. So I can't do anything with that. So, oh, okay, well then let's just pass an integer. So if I pass 5 and save this, Let's go ahead now and compile and run. So we're going to go ahead and do a compile. It compiles successfully, so now let's run it. And we get bark. So that's another way that it can be broken. Okay, now let's do something a little different. So instead of an integer, what if we passed in something like a double instead? So let's go ahead now and do 5.0. Is this going to work? Let's try it. So if we save this, let's go ahead now and compile. I have an error. So what's it saying? It's saying error incompatible types, possible lossy conversion from double to int. And then it calls out the fact that I passed in 5.0 here. And then it says, note, some messages have been simplified. Recompile with whatever this is to get the full output. So let's try that. So if I actually do this here, and it's telling me to recompile, so I'm going to copy this. Let's go ahead and select this and do a Control-C to copy. And now we're going to compile it again, but instead of just doing it with our normal Java-C error.java, we're going to add whatever they told me to add here. So let's do that. And notice it basically added a little bit more logic here, because basically it's saying, hey, you required an int, but you gave me a double, and that's a mismatch. So that's not going to work. This is why it's always important to read your error statements fully, because sometimes it's going to give you something a little extra that might help you determine whether or not you can figure out your error. Okay, so now let's say that I still don't quite understand this error message that I get, even though they gave me a little bit more of a reason. Well, one thing you could do is copy something from the error message to look into it a little further. So since this is the reason they gave me, argument mismatch, possible lossy conversion from double to int, I'm going to go ahead and copy this. So let's go ahead now and copy this error message. And now I'm going to do something that I do at least once a day. I'm going to go ahead and open up Google, and I'm going to copy and paste this directly into a Google search. And let's see what we get. So the first response here is a Stack Overflow response. And honestly, Stack Overflow is a nice place where you can go to get answers to several questions that you might have. I'm going to go ahead and click on this. It says possible lossy conversion from double to int. Hey, this happens to be almost exactly the error that I'm seeing. Well, let's see what they ran into. So I'm going to click that. And then it says, so I've recently written the following code. Well, they wrote way more code than we did. So let's get down to their error message and see if we can figure out what's going on. So they say, their error is on trainticket.java :31, which means their 31st line in their train ticket file is their error. And then they have the same error that we saw. Possible lossy conversion from double to int. Well, does anybody explain? If we go down just a little further, let's go ahead and accept this to get this out of the way. When you convert a double to an int, the precision of the value is lost. For example, when you convert 4.865 a double to an int, the int value will be 4. Because remember, an integer value is a whole number only. It's not going to contain decimal values. So basically this error is trying to tell you that the primitive int, which the integer value is a primitive, it does not store decimal numbers, and you will lose 8, 6, 5, and 7. So if I go back to our error message here, it's basically saying that we're going to lose this 0.0, and that's why it's saying possible lossy conversion. And the way to fix that very simply is to just get rid of the 0.0, which makes this an integer. And if I save this now and run it, the compile was successful. So now let's go ahead and run. And you can see we got bark. What's the moral of the story when it comes to errors? The moral is you're definitely going to make them, for one. But two, you always want to read your error messages. Your error messages are going to give you a lot of useful information as far as what you need to do to fix your code. And sometimes it'll call out exactly the reason why things aren't working. Because you gave something a double and it was expecting an integer, and that's why it didn't work. Or you went out of bounds and that's why it didn't work. There may be times though that you don't understand your error code, And there's no shame in looking up that error code if you have to. And believe me when I say this, Stack Overflow is not necessarily the best place to look up your answers. It is a great place for a lot of answers. That's a place where a lot of people go to find answers. But you can definitely find things inside of the Oracle documentation for Java. There's also stuff done by a lot of other places like W3 Schools, which is a fantastic place to look things up as well. And if you even have some places that you like to look up already that I haven't already mentioned, please feel free to post them in the comments below. One of the best tools that you can develop in your tool belt as a developer is your Google Foo. And when the Google Foo is strong with you, you'll be able to fix any error that you come across. But honestly, that's all that's left for this one. I'm going to go ahead and pass this back to me in the future. Thanks for taking this wild ride with me. I hope you learned a little bit about how to read error messages today and some tips and tricks to fix them if you run into them. I definitely make a lot of mistakes both on the job and in practice, so it's just going to be a natural thing that you're going to do when you start to work through stuff. So don't sweat it if you make an error, and you'll get better over time. Let's keep learning. Let's keep getting. That's all, folks.
That's all, folks.
I hope you have a great rest of your day, though, honestly. And thanks for watching. I appreciate you. All right, everybody. Peace out. Take care.